Namaskar. Very good evening to all of you at Yoga Scholars PGI MER. Today we have a very distinguished speaker with us, Dr. Subhas Khushu, who will enlighten us on a very interesting topic today, the neuroimaging in meditation. Dr. Khushu is a former Associate Director and Head, Division of Radiological Imaging, MRI, and Biomedical Engineering from Institute of Nuclear Medicine and Allied Sciences, DRDO, Delhi. He has immensely contributed in the field of technology in medical science. He is the key person in setting up the first ever MRI center in the country and in Southeast Asia in the year 1986. He has a big resume. He has received many reputed awards. I would like to mention some of them. He has won 2 E.K. Zavorsky Awards, 3 Laboratory Technology Group Awards in 2005, 2010, and 2015. He has won the DRDO Laboratory Scientist of the Year Award in 2011. Now, I would request Dr. Khushu to give his talk and enlighten us on behalf of Yoga Scholars PGI MER. I welcome you, sir. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Nishant, for the kind introduction. And am I audible? Nishant?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay. So, good morning, good evening, and namaskar to you all. And I would like to thank Professor Akshay Anand for providing me this opportunity to be interacting with all of you through this platform, and also congratulate him for organizing Yoga Scholar Meet, which is a mega event during this period when the whole world is locked down due to COVID-19. I am sure people must be getting a lot of advantage of these sessions, and they are taking maximum benefit out of it. I am also thankful to Nishant for helping me in setting this presentation. Now coming back to my topic, neuroimaging meditation. I know we are living in a very, very materialistic and very highly competitive world, and we all face challenges in terms of exposure to various forms of environmental, physical, mental, and professional stress. This is, when this stress is, for a longer time, this causes anxiety, depression, confusion, attention deficit, memory loss, and problems in decision making. Some of us tend to live with this till we reach a situation that it starts reflecting in our physical and mental health. But I'm glad with the type of awareness programs like this, and many more which are being organized for last few years, and more people are around the globe are getting aware and practicing yoga and meditation to overcome the ill effects of these stressors. The benefits of yoga are not new. Actually, we know them for ages, but somehow some section of the society has always been questioning its scientific basis. And I personally feel is something which is there for 1,000 years. What extra evidence you need? But somehow anyway, now with the neuroimaging techniques available to us, that we are enabled to look into the brain at work, and also look at the different brain regions which are activated when we perform a specific goal-oriented task. So imaging is a wonderful method through which one can show beneficial effects of yoga and meditation through robust scientific experiments. But in my opinion, more than the merely obtaining the evidence of benefits, the important challenge for neuroimaging is to design personalized yoga protocols for individual with basic specific needs based on scientific validity, similar to personalized medicine, which is the future of medical science. Now the question is, what are the perceived benefits of meditation? Why should we perform meditation? So, among so many benefits which we get out of this practice of meditation in yoga, the most of the people who log on to meditation and yoga are because of day-to-day stress and to improve their cognitive performance, ability to think and taking decisions. So now, is stress always so bad? The answer is no as well as yes. If you look at this picture, some level of stress is beneficial, and it increases it, improves our performance when we have certain level of stress. But when this stress, reaches a stage when we start feeling fatigue, and when we say we are in the distress situation, the performance, drastically goes down. And when this goes down, then we have, exhaustion, ill health, and breakdown of nervous breakdown. So the aim of meditation is to push this graph with this threshold level towards right, so that with more stress we can still perform at the same levels what we have been performing with the optimum stress. So now, talking about the cognition, if you look at cognitive cognition, it is basically, in a nutshell, it is how you receive the information from the environment, how you process, and then how to retrieve. And all the components of the cognition gets covered into this process. And sensation, we have sense organs which take the energy from the environment, then perception, attention, memory, learning, problem solving, decision making, intelligence, and effect. So there are various steps of cognition.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, we cannot see your PPT, your slides. I think
You're not able to see?
No, sir.
Are you able to see them?
Yes, sir. Now we are able to see.
So shall I go back to that, or we continue here?
Continue, sir. You can continue from here.
Okay, so there are various techniques available to look at the cognition. Some of them are electroencephalography, EEG, MEG, TMS, near infrared spectroscopy. They all are useful in studying the brain. But when it comes to imaging, the positive emission tomography is really a gold standard to look at the cognitive studies. But the problem with PET is you are employing radioisotopes. So radiations are harmful to human beings. We cannot repeat experiments time and again. So, and PET is also a very expensive technique. You don't find it in too many places. And in comparison to PET, if you look at MRI, which is a more easily available at various places, and it can provide you any type of information, whether it's structural, functional, or metabolic information. And with the same technique, you can get so much of wealth of information about cognition. And this is much cheaper than the other modalities. Now, if you look at the magnetic resonance imaging, it has several advantages over other imaging modalities. And one of the major advantages, the MR has a multi-parametric contrast. It has almost more than 6-7 contrast parameters, and you can tune your pulse frequencies in such a way that you can produce an image which has certain characteristics. Like if you look at the proton density, spin lattice relaxation time, and spin relaxation time, these are the 3 parameters which are very extensively used in medical diagnosis. And then the other parameter, T2 star, diffusion, you can study diffusion of water within the living tissues. You can study perfusion, bulk flow, chemical shift in terms of MR spectroscopy to look at the metabolic concentrations in different parts of the brain. So the fundamental goal behind any neuroimaging technique is to identify neural substrates of cognitive processes. And one can try out through structural changes, functional changes, as well as metabolic changes. And we have some of the techniques which we'll look at now, which are very extensively being used to study cognition. The first and the foremost is the functional MRI based on the BOLD technique. BOLD is blood oxygen level dependent. And this technique has a principle behind it that the blood, when it is oxygenated, it is diamagnetic, and when it is depleted of oxygen, it becomes paramagnetic. And diamagnetic tissues, they have higher signal compared to paramagnetic tissues. So what happens whenever we do any mental task, whether it is a sensory, motor, or cognitive task, there's an increased blood flow, and when fresh blood comes to the active neurons, active site, there's an increased oxygenation in that area, and that area gets lighted up. In a typical experiment, you can see here on the right hand side, this graph shows the eyes closed and eyes open, how the bold signal is changing. When the eyes are open, they are exposed to visual stimuli. You can see signal of bold gets higher, and you close the eyes, the signal goes down. So when you do a functional MRI, you acquire the multiple images in two conditions. One is a condition one where the brain is at rest, and second condition could be any task, whether a motor task or a sensory or a visual task or a cognitive task. So what you do then, you summarize condition one images and condition two images, then you subtract them, and then you see some pixels in some areas in the brain which have seen change in oxygenation, and they are lighted up. Like you can see on the right hand side below, there's an image which shows activation in the occipital cortex. So the other technique which is very commonly used is resting functional MRI. Resting functional MRI is very important because it talks about how brain behaves when you're not doing any mental directed task. When there's no task being done, when you're sitting idle, your brain is always active within it. And you're trying to see the functional connectivity between the resting networks. And a lot of resting state networks have been identified through this technique, like frontoparietal, visual networks, somatomotor network, and others. And one of the most important network, which is DMN, default mode network, which is very important as far as individual personality is concerned. This is the DMN network. These are these parts of the DMN, and DMN is known to be involved in mind wandering, retrieval of autobiographical episodic memory, referential mental processing, and envisioning the future and considering the perspective of others. So in both, many of the disorders, brain disorders, there have been changes in subregions of DMN has been associated with number of psychological, disorders. And DMN can be a potential marker for monitoring the therapeutic response of various interventions, including meditation. So it is basically about your personality, whether you are a positive person, negative person, what are your thoughts when you are idle, what type of thinking you have. This all is governed by this DMN. So next technique, which is very commonly used, is voxel-based morphometry. This is you need a high resolution T1 images of the brain, and then you can compare the two populations, and this gives you voxel to voxel comparison of the gray matter and white matter between the two populations. One can be healthy, one can be a disease population, or one can be a non-meditators, the other one can be a long-term meditator. You can see how the meditation affects the gray matter and the white matter in brain. This is again, a lot of studies have been done on this. The next technique which I'm talking is diffusion tensor imaging. As I said earlier in the first slide, that MR can study, measure the diffusion processes in living tissues. And here what we are doing, we are trying to study the diffusion in brain, diffusion processes in brain. And in brain, the major tissues are gray matter and the white matter. And gray matter has a isotropic diffusion. That means the diffusion of water is, in all directions, it is equal. But when it comes to white matter, the diffusion is preferential direction. So it is a restricted diffusion and it is anisotropic. And based on this, you can acquire diffusion images in various orientations, and then you can generate white matter fiber tracks, what I was saying in the central image, where a lot of fibers have been shown. And the color of these fibers, denotes the orientation of these fibers. If the red color means the diffusion process is from left to right, and if it is green, it is from anterior to posterior, and if it is blue, then it is from head to toe, and vice versa. So they are color. So this color tells you how these white matter fiber tracks are oriented in the brain. And there are about 12 parameters which we can, measure, quantify using diffusion tensor imaging. And 4 of them are very important. One is fractional anisotropy, FA, the MD, mean diffusivity, then axial diffusivity and radial diffusivity. Radial diffusivity gives you about the idea about the demyelination processes. So you can measure these parameters and talk about, what's happening to brain, when there's an injury or there's a disease or whatever. And usually the FA, the fractional anisotropy, is very sensitive. Whenever there's any problem, any insult to the brain, the FA goes down. And it is only very, very, very remote situations that FA goes out, up, or FA is more than normal. That is when you are giving a training, some sort of a training to the person, or through meditation practices also, we have observed the FA values increase. So neuroimaging, if you see the goals, most of the neuroimaging studies are trying to find neurocorrelates of various forms and stages of meditation, whether it is Raj Yoga or it is TM or whatever. So they want to look at the neurocorrelates of these forms of meditation, and within that meditation process, what are the different stages of meditation one can look at through the process of neuroimaging. Then you can also look at the neurofunctional modifications after meditation practice. If you're putting a person on meditation for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, or a month or two, then you can look at how the brain has modified by the practice of meditation. This is another one of the major goals of neuroimaging. Then you can also look at the structural and metabolic modification in long-term meditators. Of course, structural changes will happen only when you meditate for a longer duration, because structural changes happen in the last. The first is functional and metabolic changes, which are at a very early stage. And neuroimaging studies have amply shown that the regular practice of meditation brings positive changes in brain structure, function, and metabolism that improves the cognitive performance. So it is well established by neuroimaging techniques that meditation does help and modifies the brain architecture. Now there are some, I'm trying to show some images. This is a fMRI, bold fMRI during meditation. And these are Raj Yoga meditators. And the first, you see the meditation images where the volunteers had 2 to 5 years experience. Then second set of images, 8 to 15 years. And volunteers who had more than 15 years of experience doing Raj Yoga. You can see in the initial learners, there's only activity in the prefrontal cortex, right prefrontal cortex, which is essentially a seat for attention. And when you look at the 8 to 15 years, there's a bilateral, frontal lobe activity, and also some activity in the parietal cortex, which is, for spatial, spatial, reasons. And in subjects which are more than 15 years experience, you see there's a clear-cut activation only in the occipital cortex, which is the seat of sight or visual imagery. So you can see with the practice of meditation, different networks are getting activated, and one can design, your paradigms and your meditation practices and see what type of deficit a person has. Accordingly, one can suggest or recommend the meditation type. And this is another study where we have shown through the DTI, this is again on Raj Yoga meditators, we have shown the fractional anisotropy is increasing in the corpus callosum, which is a longest fiber which connects the two hemispheres. And we have shown that the fractional anisotropy in the corpus callosum increases with long-term meditators compared to the age-matched controls. And when we segmented the corpus callosum into various parts, rostrum, genu, rostral body, anterior mid body, and splenium, and you can see the color. There are different colors for these parts of the corpus callosum, and these parts, subsections of the corpus callosum, they connect different regions in the cortex. So they also, once they are strengthened, that means the white matter fiber integrity is strengthened. That means the connections, intrahemispheric and intrahemispheric connections will be faster, communication will be faster, and this means they will have better cognitive performance. So now there are some studies from the literature. This is on insight meditation by Lazar group, Lazar et al. 2005, where they are shown the cortical thickness reduces with age, and they are shown with the regular practice of meditation, the insight meditation. People who they could they could arrest the uh, the decrease in the cortical cortical thickness in the insula and prefrontal cortex. Very important study, and you can see people in the blue you have the data for meditators, and red is in the controls. You can see in controls the cortical thickness is decreasing as the age increases. Similarly, on the right hand side, they also shown when do a mindfulness based stress reduction technique they did for 8 weeks. They are shown increased gray matter volume in posterior cingulate cortex, temporoparietal junction, and cerebellum and brainstem. And the hippocampus is responsible for the memory part. And this shows that by practicing meditation, your memory function will improve. And this study suggests that meditation may be associated with structural changes in the areas of brain important for sensory, cognitive, and emotional processing. The data further suggests that meditation may impact age-related decline in cortical structure. So this is amply clear from these images that the meditation practice can arrest the deterioration in the brain if you practice it regularly. This is again a study on Sahaj Yoga meditators. Here also they are shown the gray matter volumes, increased gray matter volumes in meditators compared to non-meditators. And this is in right insula, ventromedial orbitofrontal cortex, and right inferior temporal gyrus and right angular gyrus. You can see these images, and this is very amply showing that this gray matter changes happen when you are gray matter is increased when you do this meditation on regularly. And you can also see on the right hand side the total intracranial gray matter volume is higher in meditators compared to non-meditators. So these is again data which is shown. But anyway, these areas are shown to be associated with sustained attention, cognitive control, emotional control, introspective perception, and feeling of compassion, suggesting that long-term Sahaj Yoga meditation practice may potentially enhance the functions mediated by these regions and consequently lead to neoplastic enlargement. That means gray matter volumes are higher in these regions by practice of Sahaj Yoga meditation. And these are some of the studies on neurotransmitters. Serotonin, they have been found to higher in meditators compared to non-meditators. And serotonin plays an important role in mood regulation. And in TM and Siddha meditation, lower values of norepinephrine has been observed, and lower values of NE means lower anxiety. Similarly, dopamine has also been found to be increased in increase in meditators compared to non-meditators. And this dopamine is associated with reward motivated behaviors and social anxiety. That means people who meditate, they will have less social anxiety. And similar way, melatonin has also been shown to increase in meditators compared to non-meditators. And that means people will be at, basically melatonin aids in sleep disorders. So this means the people will be at more peace when they meditate compared to non-meditators. And these were the studies which were on general meditation. And this is some studies which have been carried out on type 2 diabetes mellitus and shown how meditation in yoga practices can help these patients in their well-being. In the left-hand side, people have worked on the MR spectroscopy. NMR spectroscopy and shown that people who meditate have higher levels of N-acetyl aspartate and lower levels of minoxidil concentrations in dorsolateral frontal lobe. The N-acetyl aspartate is NAA is a neural marker. It shows that neural strength and neuronal integrity in that region. Mannostol is generally raised in the dementia and Alzheimer's, and when you have this type of problems, then mannostol increases. So here they've shown the mannostol is decreasing in these diabetes mellitus patients. So this means that they are at the level of cognition and brain. These people will perform better than people who are diabetic but who are not meditating. On the right hand side, they are shown the oxidative stress in type 2 diabetes is decreased when they are doing the practice of meditation, and they are shown that the glutathione and vitamin C are increased in meditators compared to non-meditators. And we all know they both are antioxidants, and glutathione is a brain antioxidant which will help in combating the oxidative stress in brain and help in fighting the deterioration in the brain functions. And on the lower side, they are shown the effect of Raj Yoga meditators, and they are shown that glycemic status in type 2 diabetes is improved when people are performing Raj Yoga meditation. So there are some technical challenges when you do this fMRI and neuroimaging. One is intrinsic low sensitivity of board signal. This is a general limitation of any board fMRI experiment. But the challenges which are pertaining to the meditation is frequent switching from meditation to non-meditation state. As I told you in the functional MRI, you ask the person to do a task and then stop the task. So for meditators to quickly switch between the meditation and non-meditation state, it becomes a problem unless somebody is really very expert meditator. And second thing is, generally people meditate and do yoga in the sitting posture. But when you do neuroimaging, more, people have to lie down. So it again becomes a problem for the volunteers or the subjects to perform meditation, which is not in their preferred pose. But anyway, again, this problem is mostly taken care of by the experienced meditators who can, do good meditation while in lying posture as well. Then fourth point is, subjective assessment of the stages of meditation for this subject. Now, when the person is meditating, when you're doing a group analysis on the meditators, you don't know which person could do meditation to what stage of meditation what one could perform. So it becomes again a problem, challenge. How to compare the group of people who meditate the same practice the same meditation, but to what extent they were able to do that becomes a little tricky issue. Then we know yoga now. As far as research challenges are concerned, according to Patanjali Sutras, there are 8 steps, 8 aspects of meditation. We would like to look at what happens to the brain through multimodal approach. What happens to brain in different stages of meditation? When you go from Chanchalta to Ekagrata to Dharana and Dhyana and Samadhi, we'll be really interested to look at what happens to the brain when a person is into Samadhi. And we'll also like to monitor physiological parameters, simultaneously when they are performing this and see how the imaging and the physiological parameters, correlate. So in addition to the meditation benefits for the healthy population, and now it has been amply shown that meditation can also help in neurobehavioral disorders, neurological and endocrine disorders, all sort of disorders. Meditation can be helped, and so there's a need of integrated healthcare where allopathy, homeopathy, Ayurveda, meditation, yoga, all can be combined, and one can devise a personalized package for a patient depending on his requirements. And this is a good move which I'm seeing in last few years. People have started talking about integrated medicine and personalized approach where the patient will get most benefited. And these are some of the meditation doesn't cost much, yoga doesn't cost much as like medicine and medical treatment, but they can really help the patient, of course, along with the medication they are taking. So this will take them a long way in fighting their disease. And I think I thank you all and for the patient hearing. I am open to questions. Thank you.
Sir, I have one question. So first of all, I want to thank you, sir. You have nicely explained each and every point. So my question is, sir, meditation can improve the gray matter in the brain. Also, we have seen the in fMRI improve the oxygenation level also. But is it possible to reverse the degeneration?
Sorry?
Is it possible to reverse the degeneration or degenerated cell through the meditation?
Yeah, that is why I'm telling you, when you are able to see the increase in gray matter
Yes.
in the brain, if you are practicing meditation, it will definitely, first thing is it will not, let further degeneration happen. And people know the neuroplasticity, when you do this practice on regular basis, you can have a reversal on the disease.
Okay, thank you, sir. Sir, we have one more question from our Facebook page. It is from Rita Izanji. Sir, how long does it take for meditation to change the brain completely, and what else is needed along with meditation? Also, what part of the brain is most active while meditating in simple way?
Actually, as I said, like I showed in Raj Yoga meditation, people who are beginners, in their case, it was only frontal cortex, right frontal cortex, which was activated. That means they are not able to go to, the ultimate stage of meditation. They are only trying to concentrate on some symbol or some mantra. Okay, so only the attention part is activated. But people who are more, experienced, they can, invoke visual imagery part, the visual cortex. And when they go into trance, then according, depending on what stage of meditation you are, one will have different regions. So generally people have, seen insular cortex and then, amygdala, these are the areas which people have seen changing during meditation through imaging. But I think, unfortunately, till today, there's no systematic study done by anywhere where all these things have been taken care of, and we really need to sit together in a consortium of centers and define a complete paradigm of questions, raising questions. What are we looking at when the person is doing meditation? What type of benefits, and how to do personalized meditation practices so that the person gets the most benefited from the practice. I think there's a lot of work which needs to be done. I think most of the people are doing only piecemeal. The work has been on a piecemeal, no concerted, research efforts have gone into meditation. Now I think last few years I see people, this is increasing, and I'm sure within next few years we'll be in better position to answer all the questions related to meditation practices.
Thank you, sir. It was very enlightening session for me, and I'm sure about to all of our viewers. Now, I would like to thank you on behalf of Yoga Scholars for coming. Till now, we only had one person speaking on imaging, Dr. Elisa Couzaza from Brazil. This talk helped us refresh the importance of imaging in yoga and meditation.
Mm-hmm.
So on behalf of Yoga Scholars, I'm really thankful to you, sir. Please, I would request you to reconnect once you have time. We will again come up with something.
When is that?
So we will plan.
Okay.
Right, sir. Okay. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming, sir. Have a nice day. Good evening to all.
Thank you.